Music theory using Microsoft Excel, creating notes and numbering system. Get ready and some coffee because you ain't never seen rockin' unless you've excelled at rockin'. And that's what we're gonna do here. We're gonna excel at rockin', so you need to get ready. Are in Excel. If you don't have access to this workbook, that's okay because we'll basically build this from a blank worksheet. But if you do have access, there are 4 tabs down below: fretboard, example, practice, and blank. The fretboard tab having our simulated fretboard, which we will be referring back to. The example tab having the finished product that we will be working on this time, in essence, the answer key. The practice tab having pre-formatted cells so you can practice the practice problem with less Excel formatting, putting your attention more on the music side of things. And the blank tab where we will be working, however, where we practice both our Excel formatting as well as the musical concepts, noting that those two things do go together because when we're trying to visualize music, oftentimes we have to visualize tables. And the best way to be able to visualize a table is to build a bunch of tables. Best way to build tables is with some kind of spreadsheet software, like, for example, Excel. So that's what we will be practicing with here. So we want to just build out and think about the musical alphabet, how it is traditionally formatted, and then we're going to add a numbering system. So let's go back to the example tab just to get an idea. We're just going to list out the traditional system. Think about the sharps and flats and the problems kind of that they cause within the traditional system. Then we want to give a numbering system to it, and you can debate what the best numbering system is, but this is the one we will work on. We'll touch on that as we go. And then we're also thinking, how can I convert possible types of symbols and terminology which seem like they're almost intentionally complex or don't correlate easily into normal language as easy, at least a computer language, right? I'd like to make this a little bit easier so that I can type it out in something like Excel, because that will make it easier for me to manage around. So I'm going to do something a little bit different with the sharps and flats to get an idea of it. And then I'm going to combine these two things together, also wanting to visualize this whole thing both in a linear fashion as well as in a circular fashion. So we'll also try to make a circle, which is a little bit hard to do in Excel because it's not really designed for circles, but you can do it though. You can do it, and we will do it. So we can do that because we really want to remember that you're envisioning this as kind of a spiral, as though the number series goes up infinitely, down infinitely, but also has a repetitive component pitch-wise, so that you have this repeated component that is happening. We as human beings can't visualize this way. We have to visualize in a 2D format. So therefore, we choose the task that we are putting together and then think about which way to visualize our numbering system, linearly versus circularly, will best be suited to the task that we're trying to do at any given time. All right, so let's go back on over to the blank tab and say, all right, I'm just going to start in A1. Now, I like to lay down a fundamental formatting system before I type anything. So I just select the entire worksheet with the triangle. I'm going to right-click on the cells and lay down the foundational formatting. Format the cells. I'm in the numbers side. I go to currency. I like currency. And then sometimes I like to make the negative numbers bracketed, but for this purposes, I'm going to keep it with a negative sign. But I want to eliminate the dollar sign, and I don't want any decimals by default. So I will eliminate the decimals. Okay. Then go to the Home tab, font group. I'm going to make it bold. You might not need to make it bold, but I think that's best for screen recording, and that'll just make everything bold by default. All right, so then I'm going to be up top in cell A. So I'm going to say first we're going to list out the notes. Right, and so I'm going to just list out the notes, and let's just leave it at that for now. What are the notes in our musical alphabet just as they are? They started out with let's actually make this black and white. I'm going to make this what I normally do with a header. I'm going to click on that one, Home tab, font group, drop down, make it black, and this one I'm going to make it then white. Black and white. That's what I typically do with my headers, just to make them header looking like. So we typically have how many notes in our musical alphabet? It goes A to G, but then we normally have sharps and flats that are going to be laid in there. So we usually use capital letters. We have an A, and then when I'm going from top to bottom or A up to G, then I usually have sharps and we don't have any flats. So that's one of the things that we have to kind of understand conceptually. We've got these two names for notes, remembering that that's one of the things that seems unnecessarily complicated, but one which we can't completely eliminate, but will moderate to some degree by also adding a numbering system. That's what we have to do. Okay, so also just realize that you might ask, why don't I do the numbering system this way? A, and then this way, A sharp, and so on this way. And you could do it that way. There's nothing wrong. And sometimes that might be the best way to build a table. So just remember, the question in our mind is always, when you build a table, it seems like it's an easy thing to do, but this is the fundamental thing that comes up. Should I make it going this way? Where should my axes be, right? Should I list it this way, or should I list it vertically? The reason I think it's best vertically for our purposes here is because this is going to be the fundamental layer that we're then going to use to build everything else out, typically, if you were building something more complicated. And so normally it's nice to get this as tight as possible, and the column format is usually a bit more tight and simplified so that I can then use it as my reference data to build anything else I want from it on the right-hand side. Otherwise, you get this long thing, and it's hard to scroll to the right and then work on it. Now, you could scroll down and work on it. Why don't I scroll down and work on it? Because oftentimes I like to have my headers up top so I can make the wider headers if I need to. So this is generally the way I would normally do it, but you could, of course, have it go across this way, which we'll talk more about we might do in future presentations. Now, if you want to make an A sharp, you could use an A and then a shift 3 for that $sign. That's not technically like the symbol that they use. Now, if you want to go find all the music symbols, you can go to the Insert tab, Symbols, and then find the symbols in here. The other way you can do that to just shortcut it is to copy the symbol. So just go to ChatGPT or something and say, give me the music symbol for sharps and flats. And once you have it, then you could just copy and paste it. So I have it right here. I'm just going to grab that. I'm going to copy it. I know I'm cheating. I said I was doing it from a blank worksheet and I copied and pasted. But then I'm going to click in it and paste, right? I think that's the easiest thing to do. And I really think that some of these symbols that are being used, it's almost like a bureaucratic thing that they purposely chose symbols that are totally wonky that no normal person would have. Even back in the day when they made the symbol, they got these weird squiggly signs and whatnot. So it almost seems like that's like part of an initiation process. You have to learn all these weird symbols. But obviously what my goal here is to clean things up, right? I want to make it simple so that I can learn, so I can streamline the learning process for myself, which I would assume would also obviously be most useful to teach as many people as possible with it. So I want to lean away from the funky symbols, the weird symbols, as much as I can, because they're difficult to kind of grasp. And like what is this? That's a sharp. No, it's not a hashtag. It's a sharp. Okay, And so you get a little bit of wonkiness. So we'll deal with that by adding the numbering system, but this is the back and forth that you're going to have to deal with. Then you got a B, and then we have a C. Now notice there's no sharp or flat between, or sharp in this case. There's no B sharp that we're going to be putting in play here. That doesn't mean that in some cases, like you still have to have like nudging the C backwards or C flat or something. You can imagine funny voicings that you still end up doing when you put chords together or scales together. We'll talk more about that later, but we just want to mention that now. And why does this happen, by the way? Again, it's just the system that they came up with because they designed it off of a scale that has 7 notes, which happens to be the C major scale, and you can think of the diatonic related modes. So it's not like you'll hear people say that there's a natural half step between B and C. And it's not like there's a natural half step really. It's just that's because we think about because they built it off a 7-note scale of C, right? That's why there's only a natural half step if you are looking from the perspective of the 7-note scale of C major. But again, that's like, again, in physics, where like you're looking at something and measuring from one perspective, not realizing that the other perspective is just as valid, right? You need to take into account the perspective. So we'll talk more about that later, but we'll just continue with the numbering system. So then you've got a C sharp. So C sharp, and I just copied and pasted that one. And then you have a D, and then you have a D, and then I'm going to paste the sharp. And then you've got an E, and then you've got an F, which once again they call a natural half step. Why is it a natural? It's not really natural. It's not in nature. It's just that we chose a particular formula, the key of C, and that's what's dictating the half steps that are being put into play. We'll talk more about that when we get into the modes, but we're then going to say we have an F sharp, and then we've got a G, and then we've got a G sharp. Whoop, Control V. All right, so I'm hitting Control V to paste those. Okay. Now then, what I typically like to do is to color code this. So I usually make it a different color. So I'm going to select the whole thing and then right click on it. And I like to make it, I'm going to go to format the cells, and I usually make it the color. Let's actually go up here, go to the home tab, font group, and then color code it to blue. And I'll put brackets around it. Hit the drop down, put brackets around it just to make it a little bit more clear. Boom. All right, and so then we're going to have the alt, I'm going to call it the alt names. Now notice if I put alt name, then I end up with this problem where this is getting a little bit long because I want this cell to be pretty small. See how the name is forcing me to have a longer cell than I would like? Because I'd like to make it this small, right? That's as tight as I can make it. But no, I have to make it this tight because of the title. Over here, I have to make it even larger. How can I deal with that? Well, one way is I could wrap the text. I can go to the Home tab, Alignment, and wrap the text. And so then I can make it smaller and it wraps like automatically. There's a problem with that, however, though, and that is that it makes all the cells over here fat. And I don't want to make fat cells to the right because I'm going to want to work to the right. I want to leave all my cells skinny. So I'm going to undo that, and instead, whenever I have a long title, I'm going to copy this bit or cut it, Control V or Control X, and then Control V, put it down here. This way, now I have it on 2 cells. Now that's not great if I was to make a pivot table or something from it. Because if I make a pivot table, I select the whole thing and I insert like a pivot table, and now I've got 2 heading lines. That's going to mess it up. But I'm not going to do a pivot table. Therefore, this will make it a little bit clearer. I want to make that the header. But now I have a problem though, because this one started here. How can that be the header when this is? I need to pull this whole thing down to make this work. How can I pull it down? Well, I could select the whole thing and then grab it and grab it down. That makes the most sense. Undo. The easier way to do it, however, is to insert a cell above it, making sure to push the whole thing down and not to the side. So how do you do that? I select the cell right here. It's going to naturally want to insert above it. I could select the whole column, by the way, but let's just do one cell and say insert, and then I want to shift the cells down. So shift everything down so you can put a cell above it. Boom. And there it is. So now I put it there. It formatted it like the one above it. That's what I want. So that's good. And now I can select this one, make it a header formatting, font group. I'll make this black, white, and then I'm going to alignment and center it. There we go. Now this one is now at the top. I'd like to have it at the bottom if there's only one word. So I'm going to copy and paste that down here. Delete this one. And now I can make this alternative name. I'm going to double click between these cells as tight as possible. So what's the alternative name? Well, if I count it up the other way, then I'd have to start at G sharp, which if I'm going backwards, I should call A flat. Now you could use an AB with a small b, but that's not exactly the sign. You're supposed to use this flat symbol, which is totally different. If you're like a music expert, you have to know that there's a difference between a little b and a flat. You're a loser if you use a little b and not a flat. Kind of you're not in the cool group if you do that. Only accountants would do that kind of thing. And then it goes it goes A flat down to G, and then F flat, and then F, and then E, right? And then you can't have a D sharp, because now you're going down. It has to be an E flat, right? And then now you go into a D, and now you can't go to a C sharp because you're going down. You have to go to a D flat. I'm saying D and then Control V to paste it. And then you go down to a C, a B, and then you can't have an A sharp. You have to have a B, Control V flat, right? So do you see? This is just, again, like if you're a kid and you're learning this, and you're just like, why, just why, did you make it this complicated? Even and then the instructor is going to say, just learn it that way because that's the way we do it. And you're just going to be like, dude, this is like, there's no way that's the simplest thing. And then I think a lot of people are kind of tune out at that point. It's like, I don't even believe you. I don't even believe that what you are telling me right now, because look at what I would do if my 12-year-old mind would be like, okay, so how can that possibly, let's make this black and white, because couldn't I just like make a number, and then like this would just be 1, 2, 3, and then I can select these 3 and just copy it down, and then I could just call it, like, I could just name it myself. Why? They're just arbitrary names. Why can't I just call it 1 through 12? Why? Because then I can count it backwards. 12, 11, 10, 9. I can count going backwards and forwards. And then the answer that you get from that is just like, that's just not the way it's done. It's tradition, okay? It's tradition. And I don't know about you, but if that's discouraging to me, right? I feel like there's lies happening here. There are lies happening, okay? But maybe they're not lies. Maybe that's just, but still, there's, so the fact of the matter is that, yeah, you can just renumber it 1 through 12. And yes, that makes way more sense. And is there any practical reason to having sharps and flats? No. Are the black keys inferior to the white keys on the piano? No, they're all the same, of course. They're all the same notes. There's no difference. Is the natural C major any different than any of the other keys? No, they're all the same. So right. The reason I think it's useful to do it this way from the start is because it makes more sense, right? And then so that you can tell people, yeah, you're not crazy. The system is crazy, and we're gonna learn it and try to bridge so that we have an understanding that actually is intuitive, makes sense, so we don't go crazy. So let's select these and go. I'm gonna format paint, home tab, clipboard, format paint, and then select these ones, and then I'm double click to bring it back. See how tight that one can be, and then I'll make it blue and bordered blue. It's like, how can that be? This can't be. I can't take it. So now we might want to repeat, because this is going to repeat circularly. There's only 12 notes, so we can see it linearly or circularly. One way we can do this is we can say this is going to be equal to the one above it, and then I can copy that down. So that equals the 1. If I copy it down, notice what Excel does. It takes the relative reference to the next one, and then we copy that down, boom, 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 to 12. 10, 11, 12. All right, and then you could copy this back this way and do the same thing here and let it repeat this way. So I'm just going to copy this down. It puts a 0 in the blank cells, but I'm okay with that because I can delete them. Boom. And then I'll just delete the zeros. Get those out of here. Get them out of here. I'm going to say, and then I'll make this second bit a slightly different color. Let's make it drop down. Let's make it like this green. Okay. And then let's put some borders around it. All right. Okay. So then, what we can do is I'm going to make the letter system a little bit more possibly Excel friendly. So let's say, okay, so now I have to deal with this sharp and flat situation. I'm going to learn the numbers because that's easy, but I'm still going to have to communicate with this sharp flat business. But that's ugly to put in my fretboard and think about it in the fretboard. Now later we'll build the fretboard, but let's imagine the fretboard over here. I'm going to go back to the fretboard on this side. This is our mock fretboard where I have the low or heavy E string on top, because once again, I think that's easier to visualize, the one closest to the ceiling. And this is how I want to memorize it this way. I'm not worried about the color coding. I'm just worried about all of the items in here are in the key of C. Now we will use the key of C as our default. You might say, well, I thought you said they're all the same and we're going to not do that because all the other, yes, they are all the same. But the way they set it up means that the sharps and flats are in all the other keys. And there's nothing wrong with the notes that have sharps and flats in it, but it does lead itself to giving us this nice check system with the key of C. Why? Because if you're in the key of C, you know that if you see a sharp or a flat note, that something went wrong. So as an accountant, I have an internal control now, right? I can do everything in the key of C, which I know shifts up and back great, but I can also easily see if there's a sharp or flat, there's something wrong with the system. And then so we will shift it up and back and whatnot, but I'm going to be working it. So then these are all the notes then that are in the key if you just wanted to play in the key of C, not including the blank notes. Now remember, you're going to be tempted to say, well, I'm just going to memorize all of those notes on the fretboard. And that's not a bad thing to do, and it will allow you to noodle around in the key of C, right? You just eliminate all the sharps and flats, and then you just play that, and that'll get you the key of C and all the related modes, which is a great thing to do, great key to play in. And the guitar, maybe A minor is more likely to be your thing on the guitar, but which is related to the key of C. We'll talk more about that later. But what you want to do is be able to shift so you're not always playing in the same key, which is you can do really easy on the guitar. If you learn all the note names, you won't be able to do that as easily because then you're going to have to learn all of the other notes of all other 12 shapes. But if you learn the modal positions, that's our key, remember. So we're learning the notes right now, but we're going to build on top of the notes the nodes. That's the thing you want to learn that will give you the most flexibility to play in any key. So we're looking at, so just keep that in mind. The next thing we're going to build are this bit, the nodes. And we'll talk why that's really important, but just take my word for it now. If you're noodling around on the guitar, your practice should be on learning the nodal points. That'll naturally go into the shapes, which will naturally go into what you can call the cage system or the 5 pentatonic shapes, however you want to see it. All those shapes are built from the nodes, no matter what key you're playing in. Okay, but if I go to this fretboard over here, just realize that if I build the fretboard like this way and I have all of the notes, I could still color code them. This is the way I used to do it. I could still color code them, but look at that, looks too busy so what I'd like to do is put all of the notes, only the notes in the key that I'm playing in, and there's only going to be there's never a 2-note gap the way the system works. So there's always going to be just a middle note, and you can then derive the one that's missing really easily, even if you're not playing in the key of C. Notice that I've tried to simplify this, and the sharp and flat ones are still long and ugly, right? They're a little bit more difficult to deal with, but they are dealable with. Notice, however, that if you learned a numbering system and you wanted to visualize the fretboard with a numbering system, you couldn't communicate with other people as easy because you'd have to convert it. But if you can learn the numbering system and convert the numbering system to letters in your mind, look how much cleaner the fretboard is if I just have a numbering system. Okay, that's like this is something, I mean, if you like little puzzles or like Sudoku, which a lot of people like, or something like this is where you want to look for patterns in something like this. This is clean. Like that's way easier to look at, even if I add like all of the numbers, right? Look at this. All the numbers are in there. That is clean and easy to look at. You can, at least comparatively, it's still a mess of numbers. They don't mean anything to you until you memorize the numbers, but then you can break the numbers down into a pattern. So I'm just saying, if we learned the musical alphabet in numbers, it would probably lead to a lot more people getting proficient on the fretboard much faster, because instead of looking at this, they'd be looking at just the numbers, right? So I'm just trying to encourage you that you might want to do it that way. But even if you had the numbers, you'd still want to focus on not the note numbers per se, but the mode numbers, the shape numbers. That's what we'll get to in a future presentation. Okay, so let's go back to the tab over here. So how can we make this a little bit more friendly? We're going to do it by letters, but now I'm going to do it a little bit more friendly to Excel notation as well as our memory. Instead of having two different voicings for the same note, I'm just going to indicate, yeah, there's two different voicings, but I'm going to try to have the letter equivalent to a 1.5. So remember what happened here is they numbered this like in the key of C with 7 notes, and then they crammed in the other notes that aren't there. That's how I imagine, at least, that the process happened. That's what it looks like as an accountant. They messed up the GL accounts. They didn't leave any room for the accountsman. Then they needed to add accounts in the middle, and they didn't have any room to do it. So they crammed them in there. And that's where the flats ended up happening. And now you have different voicings for the sharps and the flats. So what I want to do is say what it should have been is like an A.5, a 1.5. But they couldn't do that because it's letters. So you get sharps and flats. So I want to make the letter equivalent of a 1.5 to give it one specific name instead of two. So that's kind of my logic. I'm going to say home tab, font group. Let's make this black and white and then center it. So I'm just going to say this is going to be A, and then I'm just going to call this little AB. That means it's either an A sharp or a B flat. That's what I mean by it. See how it's a little bit cleaner on Excel to see that? So if you're going down, it's an A sharp. If it's going back, it's a B flat, right? And then you got B, C, and then this is either a C or D. It's a C sharp or D flat. And then you got D, and then you've got either a D sharp, a D or an E, D sharp or E flat. And then you've got an E, and then you've got an F, and then you've got either an F or a G, F sharp or G flat. Let's move this picture down. This is in the way. This is in the way. I'm trying to do something here, people. All right, and then this is going to be a G, and then this is going to be a GA, and then I can copy that down. So I'm just going to copy this one over, copy it over this way, and I'll grab the fill handle and copy it down. So hopefully I got that correct. Let's undo that because I messed it up, and I'll copy just this side down. Boom. All right, so there we have it. Okay, and then I think that is correct. Let me know if I messed up on one, but I think I got it. So we'll go do it, and we'll make this blue and bordered blue. Make this as small as possible. So we got A, B, B, C, C, D, 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 E, E, F, F, G, G, A, G, right? But really, we're just really thinking of them as notes 1 through 12. 1 through 12. Okay, so then I'm going to combine these together because I'd like to, in my Excel fretboard, let's go back to the Excel fretboard, I'd like to see both the number and the letter if I was to map this onto an Excel sheet for my fretboard table, which we'll do in our project at the end. So if I go back on over here, how can I combine these two things together so I can see both the number and the letter? So let's just say this is going to be number and then enter and letter. Number and letter. So then I'll make this black and white. Home tab, font group, we'll make this black and white, and then we'll center it. So I can do a cool formula to do this. I can just say this equals that A, but I want it to be not adding anything but a text formula. The way you do text is I say and. I think of the and sign as a not because I'm tying two things together.
And because I'm not typing text, I don't need any quotes. I could just say, and that, what's in that cell, and boom. So that gives us a 1A. So I'm going to call that note 1 is what I think of it as, but they can call it a 1A. If I copy this down, all the way down, let's just copy it here, keep the system the same. And so now I've got this, now I've got it a 1, which you can call an A if you want. And then a 2 is called an, I would call it an AB, meaning it's a small AB, which means it's either an A sharp or B flat, whatever. And then you got a 3 is a B, a 4 is a C. Now note that you could make the argument that you should number it like this at 0 if you're a computer programmer or something like that, because when you think of a circular system, you would like the steps to be 12 steps. I'm going to start with A. I don't see any, I haven't run into any problems. I've worked this all the way through on my fretboard logic to make this and make all the intervals. I'm going to make a lot of changes. I'm not a computer programmer, although I'm an accountant and I've kind of worked with this stuff. So I don't, like, if you see a problem and you think that you should have this as 0, you know, maybe that's the case. I don't know. But to me, I feel like this works because people are going to start their numbering system naturally if they're not a computer program at A. And I don't really see an off by 1 issue with what I've done thus far. I will think about the 0 problem as an issue when we get into the scales. That's really where I think the problem comes up. You could do a numbering system making this 1 or 0, or you could base it on the C as either 1 or 0, which are logical things to do because C seems to be the center point of everything being built off of it. You would think they would have made the C the A and started from there because it's kind of arbitrary. I don't know why they didn't do that. But to me, I think it's just natural. It's you're trying to start a numbering system and remember it to start with the 1 equals the A. Obviously, it gets thrown off as soon as you go to 2 because I can't make it 1.5. That messes up the whole system. Although that, you know, that would be doing the same thing that they did when they made it off of the key of C, and then you have these 0.5s. I want all whole numbers. So that means you would think a B would be a 2, but it ends up being a 3, right? So it is what it is. We have to just be able to memorize the numbers and then code switch between the numbers and the letters. All right, so that's just the way it is. That's where we're at these days. And so we're gonna say, all right, let's make this blue bordered, blue and bordered. And then this is I'm gonna copy this one this side, and then I gotta move this down again. Dude, I told you to stay out of my way when I'm working. I'm gonna copy this down. All right. All right. All right. So you don't have to get angry. So now we can put the same thing in a circle. So we're running along on time. So let me do this fairly fast. I'm gonna make this smaller. And then let's say I go out here to L. Now this gets a little wonky. I'm just gonna try to make this in a circle. I'm gonna put the top of the circle be C because that's the key that we're kind of in. So I'm gonna say this is gonna be a C. I'm just gonna say that equals the C. And then I'm gonna go out to, let's say, an O area. And then O4. Let's try that. And make this, now normally I'm kind of cheating. I'm looking at my cheat sheet over here, but you could, and this should be the next one, which should be CD, 5CD, and then I'm going to Q6. Okay, and this is going to be equal to the D, and then I'm going to let's make all of these a little smaller. I'm going to go from Q over to G. I'm going to make these tighter. Something like that so we can see everything. Okay, and then I'm going to go here, and this will be the DE, and then I'm going to go down to 11, P11 is going to equal the E, and then I'm going to go down to N13 is going to equal the F, and then we're going to go down to L15 is going to equal the note 10, F, G, and then we're going to go back up to J13. J13 sounds like a gang or something. It's going to be in the G. And then I'm going to go up to H11 is going to be the G sharp. And then it's going to go around to A now, and we're going to go back up top to A, or we could go to this A down here. We're going to go up top, and I'm going to go, so now we're on G8. G8 is going to equal A, and then I'm going to go to G6 is going to equal AB, note 2, AB, and then we're going to go to I4 is going to equal B, and then it goes back up to C. So hopefully I got that right. So then I'm just going to put a border around these. Let's just border these. And put some borders around these bad doggies. Let's make this a little smaller so I can see the whole circle, even though it's a little tight. All right, so we're going to put a border around this. I could hold down Control, not Shift, and I can select more than one at a time. So then I could make like these. I'm going to make this orange just so you can see the pattern. I'm skipping every other note. This is the key of C. We'll talk about this formula later. Whole step, and then half step, and then whole step, and then whole step, and then whole step. So notice what they did is they started with these orange notes before they plugged in the other notes, right? So, but you could do that same pattern from any other position. There's nothing special about the key of C, right? That's just the way that happened to work out. That's how they constructed the piano, right? So the same thing. So you could do that linearly here, right? This would go here. That's why the sharps and flats give us this like check figure from an accounting standpoint, an internal control that we're getting the pattern right. Whole, whole, half, whole, and then we could go down here to whole. I'm going to make it a different color down here. I'll make it this color, and then half goes back home, right? And then it would repeat down here again, whole, whole. Well, hold on a sec. Control Z, whole, and then half, and then whole, right? And then this A also repeats up here. So let's make this the dark orange. Do it. So you could think it linearly like this, right? It goes from here, whole, whole, half, whole, which you could go down here or around in a circle, and then whole, half, back home, right? Or you could see it in a circle this way, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Now again, we'll get into that later. I just want to point it out now just to show you there's nothing really special about these notes. There's nothing really better or worse about a sharp or a flat. It just happened to work out in the key that they happened to pick in the key of C. You could do it, you could start on any other key that could have ended up being the one that everybody basically worked in. So that's the general idea that we want to get. So, but remember, when you remember these notes, we're going to assign them back on over to the fretboard over here, but that's not the thing that's really going to unlock the fretboard. It's the nodes. Those are the patterns. You don't want the node numbers to change. You want the node numbers to stay the same. I want to see everything from the nodal standpoint, because that is transferable. Everything is transferable. All right, that's the key.